Since February 2026, one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth has gone almost silent. The Strait of Hormuz, a gap barely 21 miles wide between Iran and Oman, normally carries a fifth of the world's oil and a fifth of its liquefied natural gas. After the United States and Israel struck Iran and killed its supreme leader, Iran closed the strait. Within weeks, the number of oil tankers moving through it fell by 95%. LNG shipments fell by 99%. This is the story of that strait, and two others just like it, a few hundred miles away, that are just as easy to shut and just as hard to replace. What a choke point actually is. Choke point is a place where global trade narrows down to a few miles of water. No detour, no alternate lane, just a strait or a canal that an entire hemisphere's oil and cargo has to pass through. The Middle East has three of the most important ones on the planet. Strait of Hormuz, between Iran and Oman, at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Oil leaving here mostly heads east, into the Indian Ocean and onto Asia. Bab al-Mandeb Strait, between Yemen and the Horn of Africa, at the southern entrance to the Red Sea. Ships passing through here are headed north toward the Suez Canal. Suez Canal, in Egypt, at the northern end of the Red Sea. It's the final gate into the Mediterranean and onto Europe. Together they cover the two main directions Middle East trade moves in, east toward Asia through Hormuz, and north toward Europe through Bab al-Mandeb and Suez. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrowest of the three and the most valuable. Before this year, roughly 3,000 vessels moved through it every month, tankers carrying about 20% of the world's oil and 20% of its LNG, most of it headed to Asia. On February 28, 2026, the US and Israel launched a joint air and naval campaign against Iran, codenamed Operation Epic Fury. Iran's supreme leader was killed in the opening strikes. Iran responded by firing missiles and drones at Israel, US bases across the Gulf, and Gulf Arab states, and by moving to shut the strait entirely. Iran's Revolutionary Guard laid sea mines, boarded merchant ships and warned tankers off the water. The US responded with its own campaign to reopen the strait by force, then imposed a naval blockade on Iranian ports. A ceasefire and a memorandum of understanding in June briefly raised hopes the strait would reopen. It didn't hold. Iran kept asserting control over the waterway, even discussing charging ships a fee to pass, and fired on commercial vessels again in early July. The US answered with fresh strikes. By mid-July, Saudi Arabia alone had managed to ship 34 million barrels through the strait in 2 weeks, more than double the rate from earlier in the conflict, as oil prices fell nearly 40% from their wartime peak. Even in the best case, Hormuz is the clearest possible demonstration of what a choke point is. Not a shipping route, but a single point of failure for the global energy system. Bab al-Mandeb. Roughly 1,500 miles southwest, a second choke point has been under strain even longer. Bab al-Mandeb, the Gate of Tears, is only 18 miles wide at its narrowest point, and it's the only sea route between the Indian Ocean and the Suez Canal. About 10% of the world's seaborne oil passes through it. Since October 2023, Yemen's Houthi movement has used that geography as a weapon. In the name of solidarity with Gaza, the Iran-backed group has launched missiles and drones at commercial vessels. In July 2025 alone, Houthi attacks sank 2 commercial ships and killed 4 seafarers. A month later, they struck a vessel off Yanbu, Saudi Arabia, the furthest north they'd ever hit a ship. The attacks paused after a US-brokered Gaza ceasefire in October 2025. But when the Israel-Iran war broke out in February 2026, the Houthis resumed targeting Israeli-linked shipping, and by July, cargo vessels off Hodeidah were reporting fresh attacks, with the Houthis threatening to block Saudi shipping through the strait entirely. For shipping companies, the response has been simple: go around. With Bab al-Mandeb also under threat, oil now has to sail north through Suez and around Africa to reach Asia, adding thousands of miles and 10 to 14 extra days at sea. At the peak of the crisis, that detour was carrying up to 60% of all Asia-Europe container traffic, ships avoiding an 18-mile strait by sailing around an entire continent. The Suez Canal. Every ship that avoids Bab al-Mandeb also avoids what it leads to, the Suez Canal. This is the artery that turned the Middle East into the centre of world shipping in the first place, a single man-made channel that cuts 7,000 nautical miles off the trip between Asia and Europe, carrying somewhere between 12 and 15% of all global trade, including roughly 30% of the world's container traffic. 5 years ago, a single grounded container ship shut the canal for 6 days and briefly stalled billions of dollars in trade, a preview of what happens when this artery has no backup. But the disruption since 2023 has lasted far longer, and it hasn't come from an accident. It's come from ships choosing not to use the canal at all. The financial toll on Egypt has been direct. Canal revenue dropped by nearly half in 2024, from $9.4 billion to $5 billion. One of the country's 3 main sources of foreign currency gutted in a single year. Revenue recovered to around $4.6 billion in 2025. And Egyptian officials are forecasting more than $8.5 billion in 2026 as traffic slowly returns. That recovery is real but partial. War risk insurance premiums remain elevated. Carriers are testing the water, literally, a few ships at a time, not committing fleets back to the route. Closing none of these 3 choke points were built to be weapons. But geography doesn't care about intent. A 20-mile gap in the map is a lever, whether the country holding it wants it to be or not. As long as the world's energy and trade keep flowing through the same 3 gaps, whoever controls the water controls a piece of leverage the rest of the planet can't root around.